just
Hey, there we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, friends, wherever you may be out there. Welcome to another Let's Learn .NET. Hey, it's my buddy John Galloway here.
hello. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. My name is Jeff Fritz. Gosh, John, we've got a couple hours here to talk about Razor and Razor pages.
I'm excited about it. This is a lot of fun.
I feel like this is one of these technologies, one of these tools that are in our toolbox as a .NET developer that for some of us that have been around for about 10 years, we kind of take for granted.
It's true. Yeah, you were reminding me before this that, like it's been a progression. I got nostalgic and dug out this book that I worked on back with MVC2. And this was back when Razor syntax first came out. I also have, just for fun, I couldn't help myself. I got the Chinese version, so someday I'll learn how to read that. But yeah, it's really neat. Razor as a syntax has worked great for years, and you can build. I've built tons of websites. You have too, and
I've always been struck by how Razor as an evolution from the web forms templating engine that we saw with old school ASP.NET, ASPX pages with angle brackets and percents you had to wrap all of your code with. Mm-hmm. Razor always felt like it was almost like magic. It was more intelligent of a templating engine.
Yeah, and at the end we'll be sharing some resources and links, and one of those is we had the Razor team, the team that builds the tools for the editors in Visual Studio. We had them on the ASP.NET community stand-up this week.
Yeah.
And as they were going through and reviewing the features, I was reminded of kind of just the magic they do, because the neat thing that it lets you do is weave HTML, C#, but also JavaScript, CSS, TypeScript, all these things, and it manages those transitions for you.
It really says something when you think about there's 4 programming languages there, right? I mean, whether you call HTML a programming language or not, it's 4 languages. It's mashing together and managing inside of a Razor template. That's amazing stuff.
It really is. And I'm curious, people watching in the chat, there's all different, you can build beginner, advanced applications. The .NET website that I've contributed a little bit to recently, that's built with Razor Pages and serves, millions of views a month. So it's really neat, the variety. I'm curious from people watching what your web dev experience is. If you can let us know, that would be fun. I don't know if we should just jump into it. I've got some stuff to talk about what we'll be learning today.
I think that's a fine idea.
All right, let's do this. Let me throw this up there. Okay, so that's us. We already knew that. So you can always reach out to us on the Twitters or wherever.
Yep.
Let's go with prereqs. So really we're expecting kind of beginner level, like if you're new to C#, if you have some intermediate HTML experience, this will work. If you're completely new to programming, you're totally welcome here. And I hope you'll learn something there too. And then, we're seeing some people like MVC 4.8 and stuff like that. This should be a good transition too. If you're used to MVC and .NET framework development, this is a great way to kind of jump into .NET Core development as well. So yeah, and so cool. So what we're going to talk about here is building ASP.NET Core apps. For this, I'm going to be showing using Visual Studio Code and the command line. And so the reason for that, of course, you can do, we've got Visual Studio, we've got Visual Studio for Mac. But for this, I wanted to make something that's, that's simple, that anyone can do, not a big install. So you can download and install and set this up on your own. Easy to do that.
And that means any operating system, Windows, Mac, Linux.
And respect for you, Jeff, because you make a point of doing Linux-based development for months out of the year, and that's working relatively well for you, right? To be able to use Visual Studio.
It's great. Spend a month doing Linux, spend a month doing Mac, and make sure that folks appreciate this stuff works wherever you want to be.
Yeah, it's neat to be able to, I actually managed to break my it's not my fault. My one Windows laptop got the thing where the battery started swelling up, and they tell you that may explode and you may not want to use it too much, So my only laptops now are MacBooks. And I'm going from a Windows desktop to a Mac, to MacBooks, and works just fine. I commit my code, pull it down from GitHub. It's all good. So
very cool.
So for this, we'll be going through creating a new application, adding a new product page. We will use client-side validation, which is pretty neat. So just kind of magically turning it on and validating our input on our form. And then we're going to save that data. We're just using an in-memory data store for this. But you could, of course, be using an API or Entity Framework, put it in a database, whatever.
Sure.
Question in the chat here, and I like that, Razor versus Blazor, and that's actually one of the things towards the beginning I'd like to just kind of, talk about a little bit, is how does that fit in?
Sure.
Because I think that's an important question. So let's see. I don't have a whole bunch of slides. I just kind of want to set the stage of what we're talking about. So this is the overall agenda for the app we're going to build, and this is actually something in MS Learn. This is a new learning module that we just published yesterday. So it's a brand new one. So I'll be showing that, so you can use that to follow along. And it's linked in the resources for this event. Yeah, we can go fast through this. So the main thing I want to talk about here is, when do you use Razor Pages? How does it fit in?
It's a big question we do get a lot. When do I use Razor Pages? When do I use MVC? Because I like MVC, but Razor Pages feels simpler. when.
Well, and I get that. And then I also get talking to a lot of web developers, including new web developers. And they're like, hey, I need to learn React, or I need to, how do I hook this up with Angular, or, and I think that a lot of the time it's very easy to kind of jump into too much too quickly.
Sure.
And so that's actually one of my little things I want to talk about towards the beginning is which ASP.NET Core do you want to use? And that's a really cool thing is you've got some different options. So let me hop over to my browser and my 10,000 windows that I've got open. So first of all, this is the module we're going to be going through. There's my mouse. Yeah. I saw this post come out in April, and this is from the 18F team. So this is a team that they're private sector employees that do kind of like a sabbatical. They work for the US government for a year or two, and they help bring their industry knowledge to government. And it's just like a public service thing. I really love the way that this works. And then they advise, these different teams in how to build better applications and how to be more effective. There's been kind of a criticism of like old, clunky, over-engineered, technology built for US government. And so they wanted to get kind of lean and fast and, build things the right way. So this post, I'll throw this in the chat because this is when I don't know. I think this is fun, and I mostly like it because it agrees with my opinion. But what they say in this is choose the simplest option. And there are good reasons for that. It's cost effective, maintainable, accessible, and performant. All of these things are really important when you're building an application. Cost effective, if you over engineer something, it's expensive to build, but it's also expensive to maintain. Applications that are more complex are more, difficult to keep up to date over time. Accessibility. We did a previous event a couple of months ago on accessibility. And one of the things that really jumped out to me is simpler solutions are much easier to make accessible. HTML was designed for accessibility. Often the simplest website is the most accessible. And then, of course, performance. When you're doing less in your code, when you're running less in the browser, it's going to work faster. So that just kind of sets the overall stage of how we make our decisions. And then what is simple in technology? And what they say here is if you can make a static site, if you can just do HTML, CSS, and images, do that. If it's not going to change, and they point out one of their links, that's an example of a static site. If it can't, then you should, as your first thing that you move to, go to server rendered. And what I'm going to be showing today with Razor Pages is a server rendered application. So it is, yeah.
So the difference there, static website is just HTML, CSS, JavaScript. The server's just pushing content. There's no interaction there. But what do you mean by server rendered?
Great, yeah, great question. So the idea here is, so as you said, with the static, it's not changing, right? So it's everyone that browses to this site every day of the year is going to get the exact same information.
Yeah.
With a server rendered, that allows for interactivity. So that may be a site that you log in. That may be a site that you're interacting with a database. But the HTML that's being pushed down to the client is not, there's not much happening on the client. Maybe a little bit of light JavaScript. Okay. The actual work that's going on is happening on the server, right?
Gotcha.
So what that means is I fill in a form, I hit submit, it posts that back to the server, and the server does the thinking and validates and saves to a database and does stuff. What that compares to is more interactive sites. So are you starting to get into a lot of JavaScript? Do you have, done these things with, with jQuery or a lot of client libraries, a lot of, processing there. So this is things like interactivity, maybe a lot of validation or, like, as they point out, things like a real-time data feed or interactive hints as you fill out a form.
So
So
if I was building a blog, I'm posting up to that blog maybe once a day, once a week. That's a good candidate for something that's static.
I think so, yeah. And there's also cases where people do things with like static site generators, right? So even
Sure.
like a blog where you fill in some markdown and it runs some back end stuff and it publishes HTML.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so as
And
far as, yeah.
and when I'm building my cool new social network website, Fritzbook, there's a lot of interactivity there. That should be server rendered.
Yeah, yep.
Good
Yeah,
examples of both scenarios there for you.
right. So the last one on the list here is, is when do you jump to a single page application? So a single page application, I think of stuff like, hey, glad to, we've got some people just still joining, and awesome, welcome. We're just kind of setting the stage of where does Razor Pages fit in the broad scheme of ASP.NET and the different, and Blazor and all the things we talk about. So the most complex is a single page application. And this is something where most of the code is running in the browser. And it's running in JavaScript, or now we've got WebAssembly and doing things like Blazor. Of course, you've got like React, and you've got Angular and Vue and Ember and different things like that. And so the only reason I want to kind of bring this up is because as I was thinking, if I was new to web development, I answer this question all the time of people read Hacker News and they read the tweets and they read all the stuff and they're like, wow, I need to learn React and Angular, and I need to learn JavaScript. I need to learn all this stuff. And I learned to program server-side applications, and it's been working pretty well for me. I jump to client-side applications, single-page apps when I need them, but I don't start there.
Sure. So, and just to be a little bit clearer, when you say code executing in the browser, do you mean it actually runs on my machine inside my browser, not out somewhere in the internet cloud place?
Yeah, exactly. And that's something we don't think about or a lot of time it's easy to kind of forget about, but any web application you've got, there's tons of stuff happening, right? There's all kinds of things. And this is a mostly static site, right? You've got tons of network interactions. You've got tons of, all these different sources and libraries and things getting pulled in. And here we've got analytics, and here we've got all this, search. And I just randomly pulled this up because I knew every site on the internet's got tons of JavaScript running, right? But so those are the things, and your front end in browser stuff can be doing things like, in some cases, it's doing things that could very well have been done on the server, written to HTML, cached for forever, or cached for a few days or something.
Cached and shared with everybody who's accessing the website.
Exactly.
Not just that one person.
Right. So I've personally worked on some sites recently where it was the same content served to everyone that browsed the site for weeks on end, and it had a complex build process and multiple components and all this stuff. And it's like, you don't have to do that. So I'm not saying single page apps are bad. I'm saying use them at the right time. Use them for a place like, for instance, recently I booked some flights for people in my family. That was a case where there was a lot of interaction. I'm going through a calendar. I'm checking availability. I'm, interacting and picking seats. That seems like a pretty good single page app thing. Right. Sure. And I don't have to wait for posting back and forth from the server. I mean, really quick, fluid interactions there. So,
okay.
So when I look at ASP.NET, you go, here's a little trick, by the way. We have a shortcut near and dear to my heart. I used to work on the ASP.NET site some, and this redirects you over to here. So when you go, when you go to the ASP.NET site, there's this thing up at the top, learn about Blazor. And that is, if you want to write C# and do very interactive applications with ASP.NET, that works really well. So that's Blazor. We've done previous recent shows about Blazor. And that is where you're writing interactive client-side applications using C#. And then there's real-time microservices, APIs. When you're building web applications, we have support for Angular. We've got support for React. We've got support for Blazor. And all those things. So those are different options. I'm really excited, by the way, if you're doing React or Angular, there's some changes that are going on with the templates, new project templates for .NET 6 that work a lot better with that. They proxy and work directly with the CLIs for Angular and React, create React app and all that stuff. So I really am excited about those changes. But what I'm going to be focusing on today is mostly a server rendered application. So,
okay.
Cool. All right. So let's, I think I am kind of done with slides, and I think we can jump right in. So this is the app we're going to be building. It was linked in the resources. I'm going to actually run it, and I'll just show you what it's going to look like, because that's kind of fun too. So I've got a pre-built version of this. I'm bringing this on up. Hopefully it is spinning and doing its things. So this is a pizza website. Awesome. Unable to start. Well, maybe we'll just not do that then. There it is. Exited with code. That is awesome. That is the only coding error I'm going to get today, we hope. Let's try one more time. Okay. If this doesn't work, we'll just build it. But it is a interactive site with a form where we're managing a pizza inventory. So loading on up, our fingers are crossed. There it is. These are the wonderful things. Launching the app. Okay. So here's this, and I go to a pizza list, and here we go. So we're going to be creating a meat lovers potato. It'll cost $100. It's gluten-free. I'll add it. And then they sold out because they're so popular.
Wow.
And so we'll delete that, right?
Okay.
So just a simple pizza list. So, so great. Let's dig in and let's build it. So
All
we
right.
have, this is.
Should I step out?
Yeah, sure, if you want to.
And I'll handle some questions while you're going here.
Awesome. So ask your live questions in the chat. You know, any interactions, awesome and fun. And Jeff is going to be jumping in and handling some Q&A and also some digging deeper into the Razor syntax in a little bit. One thing that I should have mentioned, by the way, is Razor is really cool because it's portable. And so the same syntax, this Razor syntax, we're going to be using it to build a server rendered application. This is the same syntax, this Razor syntax, that's used for Blazor, for MVC. So it's very portable across .NET web development. All right, so start it up. Okay, so we've already gone through this stuff. These were in the slides and in our discussion. We've talked through this information. So if you're going through this on the Learn, you can just click next because we've just discussed all these things. However, we've got a knowledge check. Knowledge checks are exciting. Let's see if I can answer the question right. Which of the following is true for Razor pages? And I am, answer if you'd like to in the chat, A, B, or C. Interested to see your thoughts. Which is true? Use Razor pages for ASP.NET Core that isn't focused on generating HTML, such as a web API. Interesting. Okay, Razor pages can't coexist in an ASP.NET Core MVC app. Or C, a productivity advantage of Razor pages is that it keeps together what tends to change together with the views in your app. I think we could have worded that third one a little more clearly. I'm seeing some votes coming in the chat. I'm going to go with C as well. I think C is the right answer here. And I'll talk through the reasoning. If you're going to build some things that are not generating HTML, you're going to use an API. So a web API, we also call them HTTP APIs, and that's done using an API controller. I'm crossing out, yes, I'll rewrite that one and maybe do it in English this time. Number two, Razor pages can't coexist in an MVC app. And that's not true. They actually work really well together. And that's because Razor Pages is actually built on top of MVC. And I've done this before. I had an application that was all MVC and I wanted to start using Razor Pages. And I just started adding. You create a pages folder and just add a Razor page and they interact really well. So I'm going to go with C. And the reason what it's saying there is you're keeping together your front end, your view, and your page model. Those are kept together in the same file. So, all right, I just got 200 points. I am actually in a private browser, so I don't get credit for it, unfortunately. Question here. Sorry, I'm jumping in and taking questions live, which I'm not supposed to do. But can API and Razor Pages in an app coexist? They absolutely can. Yeah, you can add API controllers and they can interact. And that is a great thing, is that all of these can interact really well together. So you can have, I'm working at, for instance, if we go .net, this is a site that, this is the .net website. We're actually live here, so it's kind of meta. This page is built with Blazor. The website itself is mostly Razor Pages. And then there's also interactivity where there's like, it's interacting with APIs and functions and all kinds. So these things really do weave really well together. So.
And, John, that kind of leads into, yeah, Sean with a nice comment there. It leads into another question that we did receive on YouTube asking, well, which is best then for web development, Razor or Blazor?
And so I really think that goes back to, they're both great. I just showed a website where we're using them together in the same app, right? So here's an example of how we can make that decision. This is a page that lists a bunch of resources. We update this page every few weeks. You know, it's content, and it's content that doesn't change between different people that log into it. It's mostly static. So this is a server rendered page. So this is built in Razor Pages. And really, it could, if we really wanted to, we could do a static render. We could even dump this out to a static thing. But it's for management purposes. It works, you know, pretty well as a Razor page. You know, like these different things through here. This is using an embed, but this page, you know, we do update it, but not hugely often.
Sure.
I'll show another one that I'm happy about because I worked a bit with this recently. This page is Razor Pages.
Okay.
So here, and I made a choice on this. This was one where I started to consider, do I do this with Blazor? And the reason why is because I click on this and filter things down. So there is some interactivity here. What I ended up doing for this, for simplicity, and you know, we wanted to see how much interaction we actually got, how many people are using this page, and things before we wanted to you know, look at converting to Blazor. So just a second. So this is a Razor page. This one is more interactive. And the reason why is because it's regularly updating a schedule. As soon as this broadcast ends, it's going to pop over into recent broadcasts. This is a list of shows. These shows are coming from a backend API that updates regularly. Sometimes we'll have some sort of emergency. A show has to get canceled or something. So we built this part of the site in Blazor. It's the same application. So it's got Razor Pages and Blazor working together. So that's, I think, the thought process to think about here is interacting with backend APIs that are changing, maybe something that varies per person. This is a case where it doesn't vary per person, but that's another time where you would start to think, okay, that's a single page application. So
very cool.
Cool. All right, well, let's get into building this. So I'm going to create a new app. I'm showing this using Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to pop over into Visual Studio Code, which is open right there. All right. Here, I'm going to swap these around a little bit. I'm going to keep my instructions, and I'll be swapping stuff back and forth, and we'll make it work. All right, so go back into here. There we go. Wonderful. All right. So my first step is I'm going to create the new web app. So I'm going to do File, and I'm going to create a new folder. So we'll do, let me see, open folder. And then I can create a new folder. So look at all these folders. I'm going to, like a good person, I'm going to create it on the desktop. So we'll do new folder. I'll call this pizza or learn PB or let's learn. All right. We'll go in here. And oh, actually, I wanted to create one. Sorry. We'll call this Razor Pages Pizza. All right, whatever. Create a folder and do that. You do open folder. The reason, and so here I'm going to, this is a new thing in Visual Studio Code. And the reason for this is because applications can be doing things like running startup scripts and all that. And so we actually require, so you may get this prompt and you just created this folder. So hopefully you trust yourself. You say, I trust the authors. So there we go. Now we're going to bring up a terminal. So Visual Studio Code has an integrated terminal. So I will say View Terminal. There's also the shortcut that you can use. So Control tilde. And that's going to open in this folder. So it's going to take a little second to wake up. There we go. So I'm going to copy this in. And you'll notice this is a .NET New web app. So there's a lot of different things. You can do .NET New, and you can create different types of applications. You could create .NET New Blazor. You could create .NET New WPF. There's all sorts of different types. We're going to create a web app. And I am specifying -f net 5.0. And I'm doing that mostly to be safe. I also on this machine have .NET 6 installed. And so I'm specifying the framework version. If you don't have Visual Studio Code or .NET SDK installed, let me show you how to get that real quick. So here I am on the .NET website. And if you go through the download, this has a link here to download the SDK. And the one you're going to want, it's going to recommend based on your operating system. You're going to want the one that says recommended, and you want the SDK. So the SDK is the software development kit, and that's the one you're going to want there. All right, so let's get back to it. So we have created a new web app. What we want to do here is take a look at what's in our project structure. So here it creates this object folder. You don't need to worry about that at all. That's just what's used in compiling. It's interesting to see here, by the way, that it'll go through and it'll compile your code, and your Razor code actually gets compiled into generated C# files. So then we've got pages, we've got www, and I'll dig into that a lot more. We've also got www root folder, and your www root folder is where your static assets go. So that's your CSS, your JSON, your libraries. So CSS and JSON are my custom CSS, custom JSON, or CSS and JavaScript. And then lib is where things like Bootstrap and jQuery, that's where you would put any other front-end libraries and stuff. And then you can also store things in your app settings. So this would be things like if I want to store specific information. You don't want to put secret information in your app settings. That actually goes in user secrets, and that's a more advanced topic. And then for startup, we've got our program startup. This is just what kind of hosts the application. So if you're a beginner, you don't need to worry about this. This is the startup and bootstrapping of your app. And then startup itself here, this is where you can go in and you can customize middleware. And so this is where you can do things like using dependency injection. You can customize your routing, you can customize and add in data, etc. Now this thing that just popped up here is asking about installing assets, and you're going to want to say yes to this. And the reason why is that's going to bring in, that's going to set up the thing so that it can run and debug a C# application. So you're going to get things like debugging and IntelliSense and that kind of stuff. Awesome. Okay. So we've gone through, we've explored this. If you want to know more about this, this is, we're focusing very specifically on Razor pages in this. And so I don't have time to go into everything about, Razor in general. Or excuse me, ASP.NET in general. There are, there's more advanced docs on this. So if you go into docs, and then, wow, I've got that in French, which I was testing something, so that's neat. So let's go here. And so if you go into docs and then you look for specifically ASP.NET, then it's going to dig you into a lot more stuff about, the ASP.NET, like say, for instance, configuration, hooking up a database, et cetera. All right, so enough talking there. Let's run the application. So down in my terminal, I'm going to say .NET run. So it's going to build and run the application. Now it's actually using Kestrel, which is its own self-hosted web server. If you've been developing using, like ASP.NET with .NET Framework, or you may be used to running with IIS. But ASP.NET Core uses its own web server called Kestrel. It's a lightweight server, and then it can also interact with IIS. I can host it in Azure. I've got a lot of hosting opportunities. For running locally, Kestrel works really well. It's very, very smooth. So I am running here, and I can actually click on these. So I can control click, and it's popping up this site. So this is my very simple site. It's got a home and it's got a privacy. So we're, touring through the app. I've got home and privacy. So those are the only pages in my application. And the thing I want you to notice about this is that when I click on privacy, the URL actually changes. So it goes to /privacy and this one goes to /home. And that is called routing. And that is how these different pages, how we get between these different pages, how we navigate between them. So remember, we had home and privacy. Now let's look in the application itself. And you'll see here, we had home, which was our index page, and we have privacy. So here's privacy, and this is Razor. So we've been talking about Razor and Razor pages. Here we're finally seeing Razor. So you'll notice here that we have some HTML, but it's not just HTML. We also have some C#. So I tried to zoom, but I zoomed quite a bit. Let me know if we need to zoom this up more. But so this is just pure HTML. This is just HTML. This information here is stuff that's actually running in C#. So we're going to dig into these in some more detail. But this is what you'll see in a Razor Pages project. With every Razor page, you have the CSHTML, which is your view, that's your front end. And here we have a page model. And our page model is doing some very simple things here. It's showing, it's setting up logging, and it's got an onGet method. And you'll see the onGet method's not doing anything. This is a very simple page. It's just, it has some static information. So that's all it needs. And you'll see the same thing if we look here. This is our home page, and it's got an index, and it's got index CSHTML. Again, it's got a logger. It's using DI, dependency injection, to configure that logger so it's available, but we're actually not doing anything with it yet. And we've got this onGet method. Nothing's happening yet in the application. It's still basically static. I'll show you one more that we haven't seen yet, and that's our error page. And here there's a little bit more. You'll see this @if. So this is C#, that's C#, and this is HTML. So we're doing a combination. We're running code, and we're dynamically displaying this if it has this show request ID. So that's an example of how we're kind of weaving together C# and HTML. So cool. All right. So we're kind of whizzing through this part. We have finished the creating it, and We've explored it already a little bit, so I'll go through that a little quickly. I think I actually have some slides for this part. So what I did is I generated some slides. There we go. All right, so let's go with this. The slides are a little bit easier to read. We've explored this. Okay, so in examining the project, we have that pages folder at the top. As we saw, we've got a Razor page and we have a page model. So the naming is important. So for instance, if we want to go to privacy, we have privacy.cshtml, privacy.cshtml.cs. We have our project file. I actually didn't point that out. That is a very small file. Let's look at that. So here's our project file, and that's all that's going on. We've worked hard to simplify these project files over time. So all this is doing is saying what the target framework is. If I wanted to pull in some other libraries, for instance, like a NuGet library, that would go in here. If I wanted to configure, more advanced settings, I could do that in here. So, and then we looked at the program and startup. So program is bootstrapping the application, just starting up the hosting. And then startup is where we configure the behavior. And that's where we configure middleware, set up routing, etc. All right. So yeah, so Razor pages and their paired models. So why do we have two separate files there? And this is important because it allows some separation of concerns, but it keeps it at a kind of a manageable level. So let's talk about that real quick. Here, I've got privacy CSHTML. I could try and put a bunch of logic. I could try and put a bunch of code. Like say, for instance, here I've got my error. I've also got, this is my code behind for this, right? So here we're starting to get a little more logic going. And I could just try and inline that all into my CSHTML. But that gets kind of out of hand over time. And so we really kind of want to separate that logic from the view itself. And we want to kind of have those concerns separated out. And so by having a paired page model, that simplifies doing that. And we'll see a little bit more about that as we start to build out the form more. So let me see. Then we also have this pages shared directory. And I think I have a slide for that. Pages shared. So in our pages shared, we have our layout, and that is our common things across the entire site. So for this, think of the header, the footer, the navigation. So things that are going to be the same on most pages of your site. You don't want to copy and paste that. You want that in one place. Funny short story here. I worked, one of my first web dev jobs, I worked at a financial company. We had a site, it was built with classic ASP, and it was all built by vendors. And we needed to make some updates. And we found that everyone had just been copying and pasting everything. And there were 20,000 files stored on the server, stored in source control and everything. And they all had copied and pasted the header and the footer, the navigation and all this stuff. So we had to work to pull that into a template, right? So you don't want to copy and paste. You don't want to have duplicated code throughout your project. And so in this case, we want to put that in shared. So let's look at that here. This is my shared. And here I've got my layout. So this layout has stuff like, common things that go in the head for the site. It has my navigation at the top. It has my scripts and things rendered at the bottom of the page. So that's generally a good practice. You want to render your scripts at the bottom of the page. You don't want to block the page from loading. Also, a lot of scripts that interact with elements on the page are going to explode if they try and say like, hey, add this click handler to this HTML. If you haven't mentioned that HTML, if the browser hasn't loaded that yet, the script is going to be in trouble. So it's kind of a general better practice to put your scripts down at the bottom of the page. And you'll see here is this magic render body. So render body is where the actual page itself. So if I browse to the privacy page, it's going to use this layout. It's going to lay out the navigation. It's going to come to this render body, and then it's going to say, now's my time to shine. and it's going to render this content. And then it finishes laying this out, and then it goes back after that and it renders the rest of this. So my footer, my stuff at the bottom of the page. So cool. All right. I'm just trucking along. I am trying to get through all the stuff that we want to show you, so I'm not staring at all the comments. I'm trusting if there's something dramatically awful that Jeff will jump in and correct me.
The dramatically awful hasn't happened yet. I'll let you keep going there, my friend. And there are a couple of really good questions that have come in, particularly as we're looking at. I'll ask this one while we're taking a look here. There's a question about what's the difference between CSHTML and Razor files.
Razor is the name of the syntax, and CSHTML is the file name. So
right, I'm specifically referring to places where we saw .razor files with the .razor extension.
Yeah, so and actually feel free to, if you want to answer this one for me, because I think you may be better at it, but you can actually create Razor components, right?
Yep.
And so .razor is what you would use for a component.
Yeah, CSHTML really is, this is an entire file that's going to be rendered and managed by ASP.NET. Mm-hmm. .razor is something that's going to be managed by the Razor templating engine and typically works with Blazor. Now we can plug the, like you said, .razor files in as a component and use it with either Blazor or Razor pages. Cool. Interesting, but a little bit further down on the .razor files.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to truck through. I think one last thing I wanted to talk about here before we add in a form is our layouts. No, not layouts. Our routing. So routing is done by convention, and you can override this. You can specify all kinds of different endpoints. So if we look at our code here, we go and we're right now, when you do, new project, it does map Razor pages. And so that turns on this convention-based routing, and it's going to handle all those Razor pages for you automatically. So if I create a new page called pizza, it's automatically, if I go to /pizza, it's going to go to that. So that is the idea with routing. There's one that's just kind of a magic thing, .index. So if you have an index file, that is going to be the home for your site. So you can either use /index, or you can use, or not even include index. And then you've got also for subfolders, you've got that as well. So if I do domain/products, it's going to look for an index. If I do domain products create, it's going to look for create.cshtml. So it is time for a knowledge check. So here we go. Which best describes a page model? So I've talked around this a bit. I haven't dug super deep into it. So this is a little bit exciting. We'll see if you get it. So we have the three options, A, B, or C. A, page model encapsulates the logic operations scope down to just a Razor page. Well, seems pretty good. B, a page model provides a top-level view template using Razor syntax. So that's a view template. And I remember talking about a view template, but I'm not sure it was a page model. C, a page model is a partial Razor markup file used to break up large markup files into smaller components. So as always, answer away in the comments. We'll see how we're doing here. Oh, awesome. So by the way, if you're watching live on Facebook, on Facebook, on YouTube, Damian Edwards is answering questions there. Wow, we've also got Glenn Condren. Okay, Glenn Condren on Twitch. So we've got top-end developers that are like building this stuff. So ask your questions away and you will get good answers. Okay, so let's answer this. Which one is it? I am going to go with A. And the reason is I'm going to cross off B. So that top of the template, that's actually the layout. We looked at that layout. That's what had the navigation and the footer. So that's the layout. And then C, that's a concept called a partial. And you can have partials that are pulled in, and we're going to use a small one for validation later. But we're actually, I'm going to go with A, final answer. Woo, got it right. Okay. So going back to where we're at in the project, we have just finished that and we're ready to start creating a form. So I'm going to start creating the form. We'll see if I get through it. Now, part of the excitement of today is Jeff is going to fill in for me during that part. I'm driving my kid to school in 10 minutes, so we'll see how that goes. Okay. Jeff is going to be doing a deep dive into Razor syntax at that time and taking questions. So save all your hardest questions for Jeff at the break there. Okay, so we've explored this. We've explored this. We just finished that. I remember my answer was A. I got more points that I don't get to keep. So sad. Let's go on to adding the page. So in my application, I am going to create a new page. And I could do this a few ways. If I was in Visual Studio, like the full Visual Studio project, I could use right-click and scaffold that in. I could also just create a file. I could create a .cshtml file and a .cs. I'd maybe copy in the stuff from another page. So I could do that. However, using the CLI, I can have it build that for me. So I'm going to copy and paste this out of the tutorial. So I minimize my misspelling. So I'm doing .NET new page, and I'm naming my page pizza. So before I do this, and just to kind of make sure you're following along with me, try and think, what is it going to create? And if you're reading the tutorial here, you'll see exactly what it's going to create. But we're looking for two files. Okay. So I have two files. Where are those files? Unfortunately, I did this not in the right folder. So I could just move them, but I'm actually going to delete them and I'm going to navigate into that folder. So that's something, actually, this is a new tutorial and that's something that I need to update that step. And I apologize if you made the same error. So I'm going to go CD, right? And now I'm going to run that same command. So there we go. So now we have a new pizza page and a new pizza CSHTML. So let's take a look at those. The page itself is very simple. And let's talk through that syntax there. So it has an @page directive. This is something Jeff's going to go into in a little more detail when we talk more about Razor syntax. But that @page directive just says that it's a page and it can be used with things like routing. And so it gives information, but mostly it says, hey, I'm a page. And then the model specifies what our page model is. In this case, it's pizza model. Where is that pizza model? Well, for that, we need to go to our pizza.cshtml.cs. And so that is right here. So here's my pizza model, and it inherits from page model. And it has, yep, go ahead.
John, I think you may have accidentally deleted your program CS file instead of your pizza CSHTML file there.
Okay, thank you. And I'm glad you pointed that out because that would have made for some wonderful
some finicky compiling there.
Yeah, so thank you. That is the kind of catch. That's why I keep you around, Jeff. So I'm going to create program.
That's what I'm here for.
Yes.
This is pair programming is what this is.
It certainly is. Okay, so now I'm going to go and I'm copying from another one. Fortunately, I did not modify my other reference applications, program CS. Let's hope I named them Razor Pages Pizza. It was Razor Pages Pizza. I think we're good. This is still on. Okay, there it is. So, wow. Crisis averted. Thank you. So, wow. Okay. So let's keep going here. We've created that. I have a couple of more things we're going to want to add. We're going to want to create some backing models and services. So I'm going to go cd ... and we'll do, we can do make directory. Sorry, let's close it. What's that? So I'm not sure. Oh, this is using the newer syntax, and I'm not using that. So instead of this, I actually want to do with braces. So this is a more a fun thing, but I'm not using that syntax in this application. So we'll go here, and we'll go here. And we're back. So now let's add a new directory. We'll add one called models. While I'm at it, I'm also going to add one called services. And I'm going to create in my models directory, oh, I'm at it again. Okay, so I want to delete that. Okay. So I want to have a models, and then I also want to have at the top level, it's a little fun. Okay, so here at the top level, I'm also going to create one. I'm not sure actually how best to do that. First, let's add our model in. So we'll add in a pizza. So I'm going to do a new file. I'll do pizza.cs. Okay. And for that, we're using a very simple class. This is our model class. And we're also going to need a using for this. And let's bring that in. So this is using data annotations. So I'm going to copy that in up at the top here. So data annotations are what allow us to get validation. So you're going to see, and we'll dig into those a little bit more, but we've got required and we've got range. So that is that. Now I also want to create at the top level. So I'm going to do that actually here. So we'll do it in our services. And in my services folder, I'm going to create a pizza service. And our services, our service, we're going to use a backing service. And I think we call this pizza service. And our pizza service, this is just an in-memory data store. So this is where we're going to be saving our stuff to the database. So we've got two pizzas. We're going to start with a classic Italian and a veggie. It does some simple things. It can get one, it can add one. If you've seen, we did a recent web API with ASP.NET Core, and we also used the same pizza service there. So
I think you may have inadvertently put your models inside the pages folder. Your
Jeff,
models folder.
How do I even type? So you're right.
Yeah. So we can just drag that up one level and it'll move it up.
So I'm dragging.
Yeah, you can take it all the way up. Keep going up. You can take it all the way up to the project, and it should have moved it out.
Okay, let's see.
No, it's still there.
All right, let's see about this. Let's close some stuff down. Okay.
Did it move it out? No, you can also take it to the bottom where it's just over some of the files in it, and it'll move it out. Otherwise, you could be like, elite developer and just move it at the command line.
Do you want to move it? Yes. Now, it's also going to mess up my namespace because of that, which is fine. Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
So here, the one thing I'm going to, it already had.
No, you're good.
Wonderful. All right, I'm back on track. Thanks, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
One day I'll learn to type. It's funny because I wrote this whole thing this past week, cranked it away, and as soon as you get on screen, it's, oh no. So,
and I want you to do a quick time check because I know you have a hard stop.
Yeah,
before intermission.
So this might be a good time. We're a lot of the way through, but I think now if you want to take some questions and kind of do that deep dive into the Razor syntax.
Sure, we can do a little bit of that.
Awesome. So dramatic, when we come back after the cliffhanger, we'll finish building the form and we'll hook it up.
Fantastic.
All right.
All righty. We'll catch you in just a little bit there. Welcome back, friends. My name is Jeff Fritz. See, it says it right here. And there's a bunch of questions that have come in, and a number of folks with some more advanced questions, a couple folks with some very specific questions that troubleshooting an issue they might have. Let's take that offline. Let's get some sample code in from them, and we can dig in a little bit further. I see folks asking questions from Learn TV, from Twitch, from YouTube. Let's go through a handful of these questions real quick, and we'll take a look at some of the syntax that John was using there and talk about things like directives and some of the other features of Razor. But I'm going to run down some of these questions. The first question I have here from Learn TV says, I see the ASP.NET Visual Studio templates, and actually it's all of the .NET web templates, use Bootstrap with Razor for layout. Is Bootstrap the most used component with Razor pages in the real world today? It's definitely something that it is very very popular. There are a number of other CSS frameworks that are in use out there, but for .NET developers, it's something that we have integrated and we have carried for many years now as a preferred default CSS framework that ships with our templates. So is it the most used CSS component? Probably, because it's bundled with it. Should you learn more about Bootstrap? Absolutely. Learning more about our tools that we're using that come shipped with our default templates is only going to help you, and you should be able to transition some of that knowledge to other CSS frameworks if you choose to use a different framework with your application. Next question that came in from Learn TV is, hey, where can I download the code for the pizza project that John is talking about? So all of the samples that John is showing today are available over on Microsoft Learn. So go to learn.microsoft.com and check out the Razor Pages courses over there. I think we have a link that we can share out that has more information about exactly where it is. This is the content that is being presented in those modules about Razor Pages. Over on Twitch, there's a question here. Using the command line interface to create a new page would generate the HTML and the code behind in a specific directory, is the question we have coming in from Twitch. Yes, you will absolutely find that. There's a Razor resources link. Thank you so much to our friends moderating behind the scenes. There we go. The command line is preferred for doing these types of interactions because you will get all the parts that you need to build a Razor page, to work with it, all in one spot with the names all lined up appropriately. So definitely recommend that you use the command line interface, especially if you're not in a full-fledged IDE like Visual Studio 2019, the upcoming Visual Studio 2022, or Visual Studio for Mac. You're going to get a great experience with the .NET command line, using the templates that we've made available for you there. And of course, you can make your own templates if you want to install and work with it over there as well. Some questions from YouTube. Let me run through these real quick. There's a question here. Can you make email templates with Razor? Yes, you can. Razor is a templating language that isn't specific to ASP.NET Core. We deliver it with ASP.NET Core, and you can use it and ASP.NET, but we deliver it and you have it available to you in the default templates. But there are ways that you can stand it up and use the Razor engine directly to render text, to apply it to a model and render text. There's links and there's references out on the web that you can check out about using Razor to format text and use it as a general purpose templating language. It's a great tool for that type of thing. Next question here is, what is server render versus server pre-render? They're kind of the same thing. Server render and server pre-render both refer to you're building your code, you're writing your C#, you're writing your template in Razor, and it's going to be created. That your C# code is going to be executed on a server, and that execution of the template we call rendering. Now, sometimes you'll hear us refer to pre-rendering of it because it'll be cached. We'll do that rendering and cache the results. We'll take the output HTML, cache that, so when the next person comes through, when the next request to the website arrives, instead of going and executing all the code again, we'll pull it out of the cache and serve that. So you might hear us refer to that as a little bit of pre-rendering. There was an event that was being used in previous versions of ASP.NET technologies that handled pre-rendering and rendering differently. In the scope of Razor pages, Razor templates, it's really the same thing. You're rendering content. Another question here. What's the difference between the SDK and the runtime downloading? So I believe the question is referring to when you go to .net and you want to choose a .net tool to download. Real easy to understand the difference. The SDK, that's the software development kit, contains the command line interface. It contains the tools for you to build and write applications. It also includes the compilers, the templates, these things that you as a developer are going to want in order to build your application. The runtime are just those things that you need to execute your application. So after you have a compiled application, you have a runtime there that contains those things that are actually going to execute. And that's really great for configuring your web server so that it has a runtime out there that all of your applications can share and build and run against. So you don't have to carry that runtime with you necessarily to a common web server that maybe you have a few web applications running on. You can share your runtime out there. And we have documentation about how to set up and execute using the shared runtime. Or if you want to bring your own runtime and you want to package it with you and deliver it. Next question on YouTube is, what's the difference between ASP.NET Web App and ASP.NET Web App MVC with regards to the Razor templates and creating new projects? So ASP.NET Web App creates a project with Razor pages and prefers what we saw John demonstrating there, where you have your .cs HTML file and you have your CS file that contains the model that goes with it. That's a Razor pages formatted project, and that's your ASP.NET Web App. ASP.NET Web App MVC uses the MVC framework, the Model View Controller framework, to separate all of those concepts. So you have model classes, you have view templates that are built with Razor, and you have controllers that are built that kind of glue those together, that handle the request coming in from the browser, from the HTTP server, and decide, well, what business logic should we execute? And when it's done executing that logic in the controller, and maybe it gets a model from a database, or it sets up some information, and it hands that off to a Razor template where it's going to be, back to the previous question, where it's going to be rendered, it's going to be turned into HTML, or maybe some other format, maybe Excel format, maybe CSV format, and deliver that to the browser. Lots of options that you have there with MVC, but it's a different way to think about it, where Razor Pages is a very page-centric approach to building websites, where you navigate to a web page. Well, that web page is actually a file on disk. In MVC, you navigate to some URL, and that's an action on a controller, and it's a little bit different concept there. Next question we have coming through here. On YouTube, there's a question, is there a way to display all the routes in an application? Something similar to bin Rails routes from Ruby on Rails world. There's a sample. Some of the folks on the .NET team have answered this question and shared some code for this, but there is some sample code out on GitHub creating ASP.NET Core Route Analyzer. And let me share this link. This is an analyzer you can install in your project that will, come on, let me post that link. Nope, it's not letting me post the link. I'm going to share this by hand over on Twitch, and I'll share it over on YouTube. Where's my YouTube? There it is. There you go. And what this will do, this analyzer will output all of the routes in your immediate window, so you can take a look at those. There you go. There's the link. Thank you so much for highlighting that, friends. Hey, Luce, thank you so much for dialing in. Another question we have from YouTube: can we migrate a large .NET 3.5 web forms app to Razor Pages? Is it going to be worth it, or would rewrite be a better approach? So migrating from .NET Framework 3.5 to Razor Pages, which is a .NET Core concept and a different framework, is a lot of changes. You're not going to be able to reuse much of your user interface code. So what I would recommend, refactor your .NET framework application, your web forms application. Take the business logic as much as possible out of your web forms, put them into classes, move them out into class libraries that can be shared with your application, so that all that's really in your web forms application is managing the user interface. Once you have that down to just a bunch of for loops, ifs, while conditions, using ASP.NET components to build that web forms user interface, and it's referencing everything externally, then you're in a better place to make that decision about going to Razor Pages. It's at that point going to be a bit of a rewrite, but you're only rewriting the user interface at that point. Hopefully your business logic that you've been able to move out into class libraries is in a place that you've been using it, and you know that it's solid. It works the same as it did before, so that when you do light up and you do activate your Razor Pages application and you start rewriting your user interface, you're pointing to and using the exact same business logic. I have about 4 questions here, but I think I see Mr. Galloway wandering back in. John, we've had some really great questions come in here, and I've been answering them. I'm going to answer, let me see if I can answer 1 or 2 more here before you get all settled back in. On YouTube, we have a question. Is it a good idea to use Razor templating engine in a library project just for something like email template generation? Yeah, it's not a bad idea. Nothing wrong with that. Certainly something that's possible, something you can do. And because it's a common format that a lot of folks know how to use, I think you're going to be able to find developers that'll help you and be able to work with that solution going forward. Any plans regarding a more model view update-ish model for C#? I think F# has something called Fable. I had to work with Swift UI recently and starting to like the model view update. It's a good idea. It's a good thing. Our friends Glenn Condren and Damian Edwards are here. I very much appreciate that question. There are some experiments around model view update. It's something that we want to hear your feedback and learn more about, and help us make a decision if it's something we should invest in. There is the Comet project out there that our friend James Clancy has been working on. Our teammate James Clancy has been working on. You can find him on Twitch, streaming and tinkering and ratcheting on that for a little bit. But we're very much experimenting and trying to figure out what makes the most sense for that. And we absolutely want to hear your feedback, and hearing that that's something that you enjoy, I think helps us make that decision, and helps us and want to experiment more and but go and pursue more feedback. Any new features from 2.1 to 5.0 to 6.0 for Razor Pages? Gosh, John, new features for Razor Pages over the last 2-3 years. I don't think there were significant new issues for Razor Pages.
I mean, so there are a lot of fixes. A lot of them go into things like performance. There are some things that were brought over from Blazor that are also, popular features, like things in Razor syntax and different componentization and things like that.
That actually kind of goes into one of the questions, follow-up questions here. Any difference between Razor used in MVC and Blazor? Yes, slight differences.
Yeah.
Code block versus functions block, and I'm not sure if that's on the agenda here today. The way that we reference and use the components is a little bit different when we're in Blazor versus when we're in ASP.NET Core, rendering components there. So a little bit of a difference there. Not something that's going to be significant to scale and cross.
I agree. And I feel like this is an area where a benefit is you're learning a syntax. And so, the application will change a little bit. And so because of that, you're going to, change the way you're what the component or what the file needs to do, but the actual syntax is the same. And that's kind of the biggest benefit I get is when I'm jumping between Razor Pages and Blazor, I'm not having to think, okay, now I'm using, handlebars, or now I'm using, different, all sorts of different things.
Yeah. Let me see. Is there a bottleneck tax when pre-rendering? No. There's no bottleneck when you're pre-rendering HTML from a Razor page. Mm-hmm. Can you use .NET 5 Web API with Razor Pages? Yes, you can. Oh, yes. That's something that I think folks that are building with, to your point earlier, John, building with Angular and Vue and React, who want to build those rich client-side applications, they can put some of their base code they want to render inside of a Razor page and have it reach out and interact with an API built with ASP.NET Core.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, you mentioned something there with performance and just kind of performance in general.
Sure. And yes.
So
we love this topic.
Oh my gosh, yes. So this is on the ASP.NET site, and there's a thing where it links over to the Tech Empower benchmarks. And so this is part of, we're not benchmark driven, but we're benchmark informed when we do our development. So we really want to be near the top of the scale for pretty much any of these. So it changes from time to time, but here you'll see number 2.
Can you zoom in a little bit there, friend?
Yeah, this is, well, let's see if I can. It says so they're doing something weird. I don't know. Oh, there it is. It just wanted to wait. There
Fantastic. We go. There we go.
So that's pretty good.
Right? Look at this right here. Number 2 with a bullet.
So now there are some clarifications on this. This is for a plain text benchmark. This is for a site that's not doing a whole bunch of stuff. This is, sure. And that's the goals of that benchmark, right? But even if you get to something like Fortunes, it's still, and I don't know, my Zoom is crazy, but it still does pretty well across the board. And so we've really worked to try and make ASP.NET like a very highly performing thing. And regardless, and then when you build applications using these different types, it's the goal is that you get that performance across all of them. So,
and there's something to be said about ASP.NET Core, the web server, raw performance, the best available out there. When you start layering in your code, well, okay, now your code needs to, it's not going to get 7 million requests per second.
And yeah, I think that's the goal is we want, if my site is slow, I want that to be my fault. And then, because I can fix it, right? I can look and I can say, oh, maybe I should cache this page, or maybe I should, think about how I'm managing my data or whatever.
Can I address the last question that we have here, and I'll let you continue. The last question that we have here is about .NET 6 Preview 7. We saw the templates change as part of Preview 7, and the question comes in: hey, where'd the program and startup class? The startup class disappeared, and it feels like they were merged together. And what folks are seeing there is really some of the great work that's been done by our C# team to make top-level statements and to make it simpler to build applications. So we're simplifying and making it easier to build some of that boilerplate code. And let's face it, the program file, the startup file, these things were like my rotisserie grill. I set it and I forget it. Literally, I don't remember the syntax of these things because I set it and I never come back to it.
Here's a perfect example of that, Jeff. I deleted my program file, right? And then I just copied one in from the same project and another thing, and it just worked, right? Because we never changed this. I mean, you can,
sure.
And it's the same with the new minimal templates. If you want to override the stuff, it's available. But the things that you're just including in every project that's kind of ceremony, there's not really a lot of point. Even a lot of things in here, there's not really a lot of value. Again, I'm not going and changing this very often.
Yeah, once it's built, unless you're adding a significant new feature that needs to change the way your application starts, don't touch it.
So I think that's the idea with these. And, people have strong opinions about code and coding styles and things.
Sure.
But part of the idea with these minimal templates is, for most cases, and especially for beginners, to make something approachable, why throw 9,000 generated files at them? Instead, make it so that the code that people don't customize very often, you don't even have to write. And then if you do want to customize it, you write the code, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I think, and so this application is built using the .NET 5 things because it's shipped and it's LTS and it's, but that is definitely something where I'm really excited about, is those new minimal templates and the top level statements and all that kind of stuff.
But to a little bit of that question, the syntax you're showing here, does it still work in .NET 6?
Yeah, it does, which is great, right? So that's the point, is that it's a simpler layer on top. And honestly, that's part of what I like about Razor Pages, is in a lot of ways, it's a simpler layer on top of MVC. So I was an MVC developer, learned it, wrote books on it, felt pretty good about it. Razor Pages came along and I was a little scared because I was like, it's something new. And then when I started playing with it, I was like, wait, this is a simplified MVC for things that I wasn't changing very often. So,
yeah.
And that's a good kind of part of this for a background. If you're an MVC developer or you've used other MVC type systems, a lot of the time your controller is not, there's a lot of ceremony there where the controller is just saying return view, return view, return. And so do we really get any value out of that? So I like to use MVC when I need it. And for a lot of cases, Razor Pages is that kind of right level of abstraction for me.
Sure.
All right, we've got a lot to cover still, so I should probably jump in and get into this form a bit more, and we can take some more questions in a bit. Is that cool?
Sure. I'll answer a few questions on YouTube and Twitch and all the places, and prep the best ones, the stumpers, for you later.
Awesome. And well, great. And also, we've reminder to people, we've got some amazing. I saw Damien was on here earlier, Glenn Condren. There's some MVPs I'm seeing here, and so there's definitely, if you've got questions, this is a great place to not only ask questions but also have a discussion. What do you think about this? Or how do you structure your applications? Or how do you make a decision?
We want to encourage beginners to ask questions, please. There's no judgment here. Any question is just fine. Our team's happy to help you.
Awesome. All right, well, let me jump into creating a form. So what we had last done, we set up our backing, we created an empty page. We created a backing service and a pizza model. And so with those parts in place, we're ready to customize that page and start building out a form. So here, this is my pizza page, and I actually snuck in a build earlier. I think this will run as is. Let's see, tempting fate, because that's a good thing to do. So what we should see here is another page called pizza. We should be able to browse to it using /pizza. And when we browse to it, it should be a very boring page that looks just like many of our other pages so far. So here, notice it's not in the navigation. We're going to fix that in a bit. But if I go to /pizza, there's our pizza page. So it's got no content on it because we didn't write any content yet, right? So, but the page does exist, and we're ready to add that form. So what I've done is in the tutorial, I've included all the markup in one block, and I'm experimenting with this. It's also possible to kind of add a bit at a time. For this, I'm going to paste this in, and then we'll talk through the code. So we're going to spend less time watching me make typos and a little more time explaining the code that we have here. So some things from top to bottom. First of all, we have this title, and this, we're setting view data title to pizza list. And why is that important? Well, that is referenced in our layout right here. So when we write out the title, it's pulling that information out, this view data title, and it's going to write that as the title of the page. So that's going to show up in the browser tab and stuff, and for SEO, et cetera. Then after that, we've got Razor syntax. This is a combination of HTML and I've got some Bootstrap classes in here. So I'm using a Bootstrap card, and I'm setting padding to 3. But I'm also using these things called tag helpers. So this is tag helper syntax. And so we are using a validation summary on our form. So what that means is when I go through and if I start putting in, or if I leave something required blank, or if I put in a word when I should be typing in a number, we're going to need to write out that information. And fortunately, there is a tag helper for that. So there are several tag helpers that are built in. We've got, and some that I'll be showing you here, we've got labels, we've got partials, we've got form input tag helpers. So you'll notice here, anytime you see this ASP4, that's going to key off in my mind that it is a tag helper. And actually, let's go over, it's slightly different in, so this is Visual Studio on Windows. And you'll see here, we actually get this kind of purple syntax highlighting. So that's when I'm using Visual Studio on Windows, that really keys it in for me. Any of these that are purple, it's HTML with some magic for most of these, right? So this is a select tag or a label tag, but there's some magic involved. And what's neat is with that, because there's magic involved, this actually is giving me syntax, giving me completion. So while it looks like just text, this is code. These are setting properties here, right? So let's go back into this. So here we've got a form. And this form is going to have, it's a single row across the top, and you'll see the things we're adding. So we've got a name, we've got a size. The size is a drop-down list. So that's a little bit interesting. We're doing some things to kind of set that up. We're also using a helper. So this is an HTML helper, and it's getting a select list from an enum. Okay. So here's where that's going to match up to. In our pizza class, we've got a pizza, and it's a pizza size. And here's our enum. And that's a pizza size that has small, medium, and large. And then in our pizza CS.html, this is all that's required to create a drop-down select. So that's going to get those and display them. Price, this is the price of the pizza. It's just an input, but there's some magic to it because that input has in the pizza class, and we'll continue going through this as we look at validation and stuff, but this is set as a decimal and it is a range. So whereas it's just, in the HTML, it's going to look like it's just HTML, it's an HTML input. This is actually being mapped to decimal input. And then we've got a submit, we've got a checkbox for if it's gluten-free, and that maps to a Boolean is gluten-free. And then we've got an add. So this is our entire form here. This is the front end of the form. Now there's no logic for what to do with this yet. So when I click submit, what happens? When I click that add button, what happens? That is going to happen in our page model. So this is our front end. This is our, what are we rendering out? And then how does it interact? Where's the logic? Where's the loading of data? That all is going to happen in our page model in a bit. So that is for adding to the list. Now, if you were watching earlier, you would have seen when we added to the list, we're displaying a list of our pizzas down below. So we want to write those out, and there's different ways to display them. I'm going to use the table. So tables is a great way to display tabular data. It's so we're just showing a heading at the top, and then we're doing a for each. Now here's the real thing I want you to see here. This is the magic of Razor. So here I've got an at for each. So this is C# code. So this bit here is C# code. This is HTML. And I don't need to do anything. Whoa, I just opened up the MDN reference in my other window. Awesome. So we don't need to do anything to kind of jump back and forth between C# and HTML. Here, I'm doing like I can use at pizza.size. So since I did for each var pizza in pizzas, then I have a pizza that's in scope for this for each block. and I can just do for each dot size, for each dot gluten-free text. So let's dig into a couple of these here in a little more detail. This is using string interpolation, and it's formatting this price in a currency format. So this is going to be dollars, and so it's writing out dollars and then what the actual amount is. Right? And then here, this gluten-free text, this is actually something that's going to be handled in the form itself, or in the backend page model. So because I've got a few kind of backend things, it's not able to, I don't think I can run this at this point. We'll see. Because it's calling this model.glutenfree text, et cetera. So I don't think it's going to render. And it's not supposed to, but I'm just going to give it a shot for fun. So I'm bringing this up in another window, see if anything renders, see if the page explodes. All right, I need to restart it. That is one thing, by the way. I've been doing a lot of development with .NET 6, with like Visual Studio 2022, and the hot reload stuff in .NET 6 is so great because it automatically is going to update and run all my stuff for me. So now I think if I do .NET Run, I think it's going to explode because we've got references to, yeah. So we've got some things missing in our page model, and we'll fill those in the next section. So we've walked through kind of top to bottom. Here's a form. It's using tag helpers. So these tag helpers are HTML plus some magic. And then we've got some model binding where we're binding to a list of pizzas. And then we've got this magic thing down at the bottom that I just want to give a little shout out to, and that is a partial. So you saw a partial mentioned in one of the quizzes recently, and a partial is something where we can inject a little bit of markup and we can kind of call it out somewhere else. So this validation scripts partial is a shared partial. So I can put this into multiple things. So here's my validation scripts partial. And all it does is list a few JavaScript things. All right, my phone is going nuts. So I'm checking that nothing is on fire. Okay, good. So here we've got a few scripts. Now, what's nice with this is it is shared, and I can include this in any page in the site that I want, but I don't have to include it in all of them, right? So my layout, if we look way down at the bottom, it has this render section scripts, and then my pizza has this section scripts, and it's got a partial. So the way all that maps together is in the layout, when it sees render section scripts, it looks for in the page, do I have a section scripts? I do. And then the only markup in here is this partial. And then that partial is injecting those, that JavaScript, those two JavaScript references. So cool. All right, so we have created the form. I think we are about done with all of that. So now we're going to handle interactions in the page model. So we've done the front end, and now it's time to turn our attention to this. So our page model does a few things. It handles interaction with the front end. It also provides a way that I can make data available to bind to it. So what that means is we're going to need a few things in the front end. We're going to need a list of pizzas, and we're going to need a single pizza for our form. So first of all, let's fill in that list of pizzas. And actually, I'm going to kind of like, we've got several different things. So we've got our form. So our form to create a pizza, we're going to be adding a new pizza. And I can do that. Let's see. I will confess I'm more used to, let me see, format document. Let's see how it does there. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to add in a new pizza. And look, pizza, new pizza. I typed that wrong. So if you're following in the doc, this should instead say public pizza, new pizza, like that. So this is using a model, so we need to bring in a using statement there. And I'm going to copy and paste that over so I don't mistype. So that is so now what this is doing is Razor Pages. So I probably mistyped that, and I think I saw someone mention that in the chat earlier. So this is Razor Pages Pizza. See if I can learn to type. Let's save that. Get that. Yeah, actually, I'm a little confused here. Using, what is upset? Did I already have it? Oh, my namespace is off. So that's something. So, and this is again because I typed everything crazy. So let's instead do this. Tell you what I'm going to do. Because I mistyped this. I'm going to follow what I did on the front end. I'm going to paste this in and we'll talk through it. And hopefully this will work. So pizza. Close everything and try and save things and see what we have wrong. So pizza. Okay, so this was wrong here because we had, oh no, that was right. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm navigating through because I think I have my usings not mapped to stuff. Unfortunately, we are not going to handle a download pizza feature. We don't get to that today, so that's unfortunate. All right, let me see. I've got to build, and I've got, I think some namespaces are thrown off. So namespace Razor Pages Pizza dot pages. So that is correct. And then here, and that is correct. Okay. And then let's make sure, one last thing is I want to make sure our pizza, and that looks correct. So let's try and build it again. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so that's right. So I wonder why it was freaking out at me. And this also, I get a lot of syntax errors. If this continues to freak out at me, let's run it. If it freaks out, I may switch over to my existing running one because I want to spend the time looking at the code. Okay, it's running. So it says it's running. So it may be a weird thing where it's just trying to give me trouble with syntax highlighting. So let's go here. And if that's the case, then I can switch back into showing you the code a bit more. Okay, so we're going to go to /pizza. Running, so we can, so the code is valid, and now we can talk about why it works, and we can ignore the squiggles. So, oops, that's funny. Okay, we'll go medium. We'll say that it costs $1, and let's click add. Okay, so here we got a validation error. So that's good. That's what we wanted because pizzas do not cost dogs. They cost money. So here, let's take a look at this a little bit more and see what's going on. So this input, remember I said that this was using an input tag helper. And so that input tag helper, don't bother reading through all this. It's actually written in the tutorial what it is. But it has things like data val range min, data val range max, etc. So that is used by those in-page scripts, and it's actually processing that, and it's using it to validate on the client side. So this is client-side validation. So it's checking before I even can submit the form, it's got to be valid. So let's instead look at $20. Let's say it's gluten-free and add it. So now it's added to the list. And then when I click on delete, it's going to remove that. So now let's dig in a little bit more. And if that continues, let me switch over to Visual Studio because it's just bugging me. All right. So let's see. Yeah. I'm going to close.
John, did you accidentally move the models folder there?
So I didn't. And what's interesting is that it's actually running. Like the code is running and it's valid. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And to be clear, the models folder is just a convention. If you have it still in whatever namespace, it does get compiled up and referenced properly. So yeah, there models is a sibling to the pages folder. So that's okay.
That's what it should be. Yeah. So I think that maybe my moving stuff around convinced the syntax highlighting. I'm going to try actually close and reopen the solution. And if that doesn't work,
okay. I was going to say you can do a reload workspace.
Oh, yeah, that would have been much better.
Right. That's the way I would do it if I was in Visual Studio. But in Visual Studio Code, we could say just reload the workspace.
Yep. Okay. Let's see if it's going to keep giving me trouble. You'll notice, by the way, that it now has a bin folder. And I get that when I compile and run my application. So now let's go into my pages. Let's take a look at pizza. No syntax errors. Now let's look at pizza.cs. No syntax errors. So wonderful. Now we can look at the code. Okay, what I want to do now at this point is look at these interactions in the page model. So we looked at how we used those input helpers and model binding on the front end. And now we want to look at how we're providing data and handling interactions in the page model. So the first thing, this onGet. So the onGet method gets handled in a GET request. So this is what happens when I browse to the page. I browse to /pizza and it needs to render. For that, I need to get all the pizzas. So it's kind of, we just have a magical pizza service that's running. And the idea with this, think of this as it could be hitting a database or whatever, right? So in this case, our pizza service is just reading from an in-memory list. So I'll just point that out to you in case you're curious. So here we have, here's our list, and get all just says return all the pizzas. So it's basically like stub code. So, so that is the get all. That's a pretty simple case. What's neat with that is I call it get all. I have a list called pizzas. So this is a public thing in the pizza model. Because of that, when I am running in my pizza page, when it does for each pizza in model.pizzas, it is able to bind to that. So it's able to bind to model.pizzas is in the page model as pizzas. Now, one thing that I really like about this page model approach is I can have multiple things that I can bind to. So previously, when I was doing a lot of MVC, I would have a bunch of different models, and sometimes I'd need like a list, and then I'd need a new one, or a new pizza to add, and I would need maybe some other information, and I'd need to create all these view models. So a pizza model kind of serves some of the purposes as a view model. You can have multiple things that you can bind to. Here I've got a list of pizzas, but I've also got a new pizza. So I'm binding to this new pizza property. So that the new pizza is used in the form. So here we go. Here's our new pizza up at the top. So you'll see here, new pizza.name, new pizza.slice, new pizza.blah, blah, blah. So there's a few different ways you can bind. In this case where I've got both a list and I've got one specific new one, this seems to be the smoothest to me, is to bind to two separate things. So I'm binding to new pizza and I'm binding to specific one. Now that's great. I filled in the form. It's able to bind all these things. So new pizza.name, all these things are going to map directly, and they're being bound because of this bind property to a new pizza. So now we need to handle one more thing, which is that post to create this new pizza. So here's the magic there. On post maps to a post request. So when I submit my form, that's an HTTP post back to the back end, back to ASP.NET. So it automatically is going to run this on post method. So here we're going to do two things. First, we're going to check if the model is valid. We've already validated in the client, but it's a best practice to always validate client and server. Somebody, for a few reasons. One is someone may have JavaScript just turned off on the front end. But another is that, people can try and hack your site or whatever, can try and bypass your JavaScript validation. Or you may have errors in your JavaScript validation, whatever. We always want to validate on the server as well. So we say if model state is invalid, just return the page again. And this will just display the page with the form and they can fill it out again. How do we decide if that model state is valid or not? Well, here's where we go to our data annotations. So we have two data annotations in use here. We've got required and we've got range. So there is implied in here also, because this is a decimal, it's also going to validate that it's the correct type as well. So that's why when I try and fill in dog or something, it's validating, no, this is a decimal, so it needs to be a valid decimal. So it validates the types, it validates my annotations, and all I need to do in my on post is say, if it's not valid, return the page. Otherwise, if I've gotten to here, I know that it's valid. So I'm going to call two things. First, I'm going to add the new pizza to the list through the service, and then I'm going to do redirect to action. Why am I doing this? Well, the reason is we've updated our state and we want to basically reload the page now. We want to clear out the form and we want to display the list of pizzas. And our list of pizzas now includes that new pizza. So I do redirect to action. What does that do? That pops me up to this on Git. So it just runs this. We've already seen how that works. It just displays the page. So one thing I really want you to notice here is there's not a lot of code in this. Because of the separation of concerns, we're doing just a few things, and we're able to write a very small, tight on post or on Git method. Now, if you're watching close, there's a couple of other methods that I've skipped over, and I want to talk through those now. So there's this gluten-free text. What is this for? Well, we've got this is gluten-free checkbox. So that's a Boolean. If we look at our pizza model, is gluten-free as a Boolean. How do we want to display that in the form? We don't want to say true or false in the form. That wouldn't really make sense to a user. So in the list down at the bottom, where it writes them out, we do model.glutenfree text. We pass in the pizza, and then that gluten-free text is going to just do some formatting here. This is a real world, very useful thing. I just this past week was working on a page. I needed to do some complex formatting. I had started to think, oh, I'm going to write all this in my Razor front end, in my CSHTML. And then I was thinking, this is not maintainable. This is ugly code. It's not easy to debug and step through. Instead, I can abstract this to a utility method. So I highly recommend doing this. Like, go through and refactor your CSHTML. If you see a lot of logic in there, start thinking about, should this be in a page model? Should this be in a partial? So you really want your CSHTML to have as little code as possible, and you want to put that processing, put that logic into your page model. So we've gone through a lot of things. Try and think if there's one main concept that I haven't talked about in that form. All right, that thing is delete. So there's a delete button shown for each item. There's a few different ways to handle this. I chose to do this as a separate form with a delete button for each one. And that makes it easy to handle the routing. So this form, this is actually this is using HTML helper, or tag helper, excuse me. And it is, so this ASP page handler, this is going to map to on post delete. So because I called this delete and it's going to be posting a form, by convention, that goes directly to on post delete. And because I hooked up the routing for it, ASP route ID, I give it an ID. And because of that, I submit the form, and then that on post delete handles this. And our logic there is very simple. We tell the service to delete the item, and then we redirect back and display the page again. So we're getting short on time. I want to make sure I cover through all that code. But I think high level, what I really recommend seeing out of this, CS/HTML, keep it mostly HTML, use your input, use your tag helpers to really kind of keep that lightweight and focused. You put your logic in your page, page model. And with your page model as well, try and keep your functions as small and light as possible. So even if I'm doing something like saving this information to Entity Framework or making an API call, I recommend if it's more than a few lines of code, think about abstracting that off to a service. There's one other thing that I always do, which is just because it starts to bug me if I don't, is I want to add a link to the navigation. So as Jeff starts to jump in and tell me one other thing.
But one other thing.
What is that one other thing?
So the question that you touched on briefly, but back in that delete method, you did a redirect to action at the end of it. And the question is, well, why redirect to action when you could just return the page at that point?
You're right.
And you could, but I think we want to talk a little bit about the post redirect get methodology, why you would choose that.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So, well, go ahead.
So, right. And to the question from Dukasoft on Twitch, if by returning page on a delete action, you can hit F5 and it will repost that same delete action. Where when we do the redirect, post redirect to the get action, it's going to send you to the get that just shows you, here's the list of pizzas on the page. So when you hit F5 and refresh, or Control R, or whatever your browser might be, it's just going to refresh that list, and it won't reactivate the post to delete again.
And this is, what you're pointing out there is a really good point. And it's a reason why understanding how HTML is working, how HTTP is working is important, because there have been cases where people would just implement a lot of delete things on a page as a bunch of links. And it's possible, like for a web spider, to hit each one of those, right? And delete all the things out of the page. Or it's possible, like you said, to refresh the page and it actually resubmits something. So this post redirect get is really an important and useful way to keep things like from handling those interactions correctly. So now if I do
it's a common pattern that you can use in many applications.
I want to do one other thing before we jump in.
Yes, please. You were mentioning links.
Yes. So here I'm going to go into the navigation section up in the layout, and I'm just going to add in one other thing. So this is the tag helper again. This is saying redirect to the pizza page. And the only reason for that is now when we run this for one last time, we're going to see it up in the nav at the top. So that's, just the idea there. You want to integrate your thing into the site. And what I wanted to show there is that this, it's very easy to edit that layout and to kind of control things from there. So I'm going to bring that page up. We'll see it one last time, and then we'll talk about some kind of what to learn next stuff. So here, now I've got pizza list. And again, we've got, our, I guess we'll add that. That's interesting because I'm using that, and we'll do. We'll try and save a dog again, just see if, nope, still going to prevent it. Let's do $10 million. And that is unfortunately too much. So all our validation is working. We'll go there, and then we can go through and delete everything but our new pizza. So I hope that, it's we've covered a lot here, but I hope that you kind of run through this this tutorial on your own if you didn't get a chance to today, and take a look at some of that information.
Learn modules you go through. You're going to get a trophy when you finish it. You're going to you're going to have a sense of accomplishment. It'll appear in your Learn credentials as a lesson as a module that you've completed. Real easy to go through. We have a couple questions here, John, that we can go through real quick if we're at the end of the unit there.
We are. I think the one last thing that I need to do, there is a summary here. So this has a link to some additional things. So we've got a lot of good stuff in the kind of in the resources link, but then there's also some great stuff for digging deeper. This is a kind of scratching the surface, but things like, tell me more about the tag helpers, tell me more about routing, et cetera. This is where you go to find that. All right, let's take some questions.
All right, so we had a question come in from Twitch earlier asking about the locale used when you formatted the price. It formatted with American dollar sign, with a decimal between and 2 zeros afterwards, where it might be different in other locales. Where's that being configured if we want to change that?
That is a great question, and that is a perfect example of the sorts of things that get configured. Oops, am I wrong? There we go. That's an example of the sort of thing that's configured in Startup. So Startup is where I can configure, and I can go through and I can start doing more like configure my middleware. I can configure stuff for that, reading the locale. And there's actually a really, here, let me see, let's read that, localization. It is definitely not a super simple topic. It's something where you've got to, there's a lot to consider there. But there are localization tag helpers. There's a whole system for mapping locale that can come from routes. It can come from, it can be, like inferred from the browser, et cetera. So there's a lot of information there as far as that. But this is by default.
Go ahead.
Well, it's going to default to my application, to my server's locale, right? Yep. So it's going to based on that. But I can override that, and where I would do that is in the startup.
I was going to point out, when you go to the docsmicrosoft.com website and you navigate around, if you look at the URL that you're on the address bar, you'll see how the locale is embedded in there. So when John had it up there, there was an EN-US because he's reading American English. For other folks out there, it'll have your locale embedded in there, and you can tune your application to include that feature as well. Exactly.
And so this is an example, like these sites run on ASP.NET, and here this is, like here we saw before, like FR-FR. And so you can set this stuff and it'll handle that localization.
Yeah.
As an example, we use localization tag helpers in the .NET site. The site itself is not totally localized. We don't have those resources, but it's globalized. So it's ready for localization. So.
Cool. There's a question here from YouTube. What framework do you recommend starting web development with? Blazor, Razor Pages, or MVC?
I recommend trying Razor Pages and Blazor. I honestly, so my brain thinks, I personally feel like Razor Pages feels like the simplest and most intuitive. But I've talked to other people, and I think you might differ with me on this, Jeff. Blazor is also pretty intuitive. But so here's how I recommend getting started. Go through here and you click on, you can do any of these, but if you click on Get Started, this is going to take you to a quick ASP.NET thing. You can go through this in a matter of a few minutes, right? So this is a download, install, create your app. So it's even more lightweight than what we just covered. So this is in our Learning Center. And then there's also one for Blazor. So if you go through, and I recommend just try both of them and see which one feels more intuitive to you. So here, if I go through this Blazor, Get Started, and there's advantages to both. I feel like there's some simplicity. If you're building applications that are, talking to a database or doing kind of more back-end sort of stuff, then Razor Pages is a little bit of a simpler fit. If components and doing kind of front-end interactions is what you're going to be building, then that front end, with Blazor is a really nice story. So.
And we are right at time. We have 1 minute till we say goodbye to our friends on Learn TV. But my gosh, John, there's so much to learn about Razor, and it really is a great base technology to start your web development experience with .NET.
It really is. If you're a .NET developer and you haven't done ASP.NET Dev yet, start Razor Pages. And if you're new to web development or whatever, I think this is a great way where you can, within a day, you can feel kind of comfortable with building a short, simple application.
Absolutely. There was a last question. Hey, can you do a Blazor session like this? We did last month. Check out the YouTube channel for a link, youtube.com/.net, and there's information out there.
Yep.
All right. I think that's a stream. I think that's a video here.
I think that is. Thanks, everyone, for showing up. And join us next month when we're doing one on IoT, so Internet of Things, all kinds of devices and kind of fun stuff.
All the blinking lights.
All right. Well, with that, I think we can say goodbye.
All righty. Catch you later, friends.